Hi, everyone. I am Brenna Heaps. Thank you so much for joining us today. What we're going to be talking about today is a discussion of the Tidelift Maintainer Survey highlights. So earlier this year, Tidelift completed its first ever full survey of open source maintainers. Nearly 400 maintainers responded with thoughts about how they fund their work, what they enjoy about being a maintainer, what they do not enjoy about being a maintainer, and a lot of other interesting insights and highlights. So we thought it might be fun to invite some folks who work in the world of open source to discuss key findings from the survey and just share y'all's thoughts, and let's talk about it a little bit. Does that sound okay?
Sounds good.
All right. So before we get started, I thought I would give everyone a chance to introduce themselves. Y'all know it yourselves much better than I do. So let's not make it me doing the introductions. All right, let's get started. Gina, do you want to kick it off?
All right, of course. Yeah, so my name is Gina Hoyske. That last name gives a lot of people pause who were not born and raised in Germany like I am. There is no B in there. A lot of people think there is. Yeah, and I am the creator and maintainer of Octoprint, which is the snappy web interface for your 3D printers. I've been working on that for, over 8 years now. And most of that time, actually, I've been working on it full time. And since 2016, also fully crowdfunded. So I'm in the happy position to say that I work full time on open source and that the people using my stuff are actually paying me to keep maintaining it, which is amazing.
All right, Alex, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hey, all. Alex Clark, creator of Python Pillow here, president of AClarkNet, open source consulting, Django web development, and president and executive director of DC Python, organizing Python events in DC. And Pillow started in 2010. No one cared for 3 years. As of 2013, people cared, and as of 2019, Tidelift has been funding it. And my team has 4 people beside myself. So suffice to say, I'm very happy with Tidelift and Pillow and the potential to grow this business model to full-time employment for folks like me.
It's awesome. Thank you. Isabel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Isabel Costa. I'm from Portugal, but I'm living in London. I'm a software engineer, and what I do on the side is I'm one of the admins for a community called I Need to Be Open Source Community. And yeah, basically what I do in terms of open source is I manage the community. There's like 2 projects there that I maintain together with a couple of people from the community. And yeah, I participated in a couple of open source programs. My start was with 24 pull requests, and then I got into GSOC. And then from there on, I've been a mentor for Google Coding and admin for Google Summer of Code. And now I'm just doing admin stuff at the community.
It's very cool. Thank you for joining us. And Eva, would you like to go?
Sure. My name is Eva Jadlowska. I am the executive director of the Python Software Foundation, which is the nonprofit organization behind the general Python community and the CPython implementation of Python. And what we do is we have several programs within our nonprofit that supports the community and the language. And we're actually doing quite a few new things this year, such as employing a developer in residence to help CPython, as well as a project manager for packaging. And it's the first time we'll be doing it this year. So we're really excited to see where that will take us.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing and for joining us. Lawrence, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Lawrence Heck. I'm an analyst with the New Stack. I'm also an independent consultant. I work with Tidelift to help create this survey and analyze the survey. And what's pertinent here is that 22 years ago, I created an independent network of experts to help everybody monetize their own expertise. And that business failed. And ever since, I've been trying to create a new business model to help independent free agents succeed.
All right, thank you so much. All right, so if everyone's ready, I think we can go ahead and get started. And we'll talk about the first data point. So we wanted to start by sharing data that helps answer a key question about open source maintainers and how much are they getting paid? Are they getting paid? And who is paying them? So we asked the question in the survey and we got the results. And take a look at these two charts and what they're showing us. We found that almost half of maintainers do not get paid anything to maintain their open source projects. So that's nothing, and that's over half. Only a quarter of the maintainers earn more than $1,000 a year for their work. And only 6% earn what most would consider a living wage from their work, so more than $50K a year. So I guess my question for y'all is, does this surprise you? Is this what you expected to see? Or are there any surprises in that?
If
I
I
guess-
may just,
Yeah, go for it.
sorry. Personally, I'm not even remotely surprised, or maybe if I'm surprised that it's already 6% who are making a living wage. So I would have expected this number to be way less, or way smaller. Sorry, that was German English that I just put out. It sadly is more of a fact still. I think that open source maintainers usually do not get paid, and I consider myself in a very lucky position that I am part of the 6%. But it's not that surprising, sadly. Now, Eva, go ahead. Sorry.
No need to apologize. I was going to say exactly the same thing, that it is unfortunate that I'm not surprised by these results.
I'm also not surprised, but I will say I'm optimistic that we're on a track to improve the status quo, and it is an exciting time. But it's, that's also wanted to say thanks, Tidelift, for having me in my intro, and I forgot to say that. I probably have other thoughts, but let me just get that one out and take a minute to,
Of course,
think again.
I guess another perspective is this is changing, and we are seeing through this data that, there are some improvements happening. My question is how long, and I know maybe a question to answer a question is not the right approach, but how long is it actually going to take us in order to get to a sustainable place where maintainers are being paid when they need to be paid before it's too late?
The PSF growing real, employees is exciting along those lines, if not directly, the goal or victory for Tidelift. It's exciting progress.
Well, and of course, even within the PSF, we do have several projects now that are part of Tidelift, and that is a huge help for them because they are individual maintainers of very popular projects.
Does anyone have any personal experience that they'd like to share around this subject as far as being a maintainer attempting to get funding for your project and what that journey was like, or what y'all saw out there that was kind of, if you thought it would be one way, and then what you actually encountered when you went out to kind of research what it would take? Anything you're willing to share?
I think my second thought that I was trying to formulate a few minutes ago that may answer that is that I think most folks doing this start out just to do it and aren't really thinking about making a living doing it. And so to get paid for it is somewhat akin to getting a record deal or something. I'm also a musician, so I tend to relate the two. You can make a great album and no one can care. You can make great software and no one can care, and you can't make a living off of it. So to get paid for something that you would do anyway is really what's happening with open source.
So at least in my case, I would say I would not necessarily be doing it anymore if I wasn't getting paid. Because for me, the point I found myself at basically at a crossroads where it was either I now find a way to to monetize what I'm doing here and find a way to make a living out of that, or I have to stop doing it because it was becoming unhealthy to do this maintenance of this project of myself as a pet project, basically as a side hustle. So yeah,
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm sure that there's many factors that go into it as well. You know, maintainers are people and people are different. So your life circumstances and what you have on your plate also, I think, factors a lot into that as well. So it's interesting to hear different experiences and thoughts and journeys. Does anyone have any other thoughts on that data point? If not, we can move on to the next one.
I do.
Please, Lawrence.
The two things to note is, one is a lot of times people confuse maintainers with contributors. So a lot of times there's a lot of studies that show that people contribute while they're working. So they're getting paid to contribute on someone else's project. So you're not maintaining your own project. You're getting paid by a big tech company to work on their project. That's not what this chart's talking about. And so when a lot of people are talking about they're getting paid to work on open source, they're getting paid to work on someone else's open source projects. And that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about paying the maintainers. And because a lot of open source projects that are being maintained are hobby projects and not projects that are more infrastructure related projects, which is something that maybe we could talk about later on. But I personally talk to a lot of people who work on cloud infrastructure, Linux projects, those type of things that are much more likely to have people getting paid to work on because they're not passion projects.
I find it helpful to think of Tidelift as the Red Hat for software. And if Red Hat was selling services on top of the free OS, then Tidelift is selling services on top of the free software. And there is a place for everyone, whether you're, like you said, a contributor or maintainer. Contributions will continue to come in whether or not you're on the core team of the software that is being funded. So I asked people on my team, do you want money for this? And the ones that said yes now get paid. Some people don't.
It's interesting.
Why don't people want money?
Some people are comfortable making small contributions that are, that they're making for whatever reason they're making, and that commit or contribution makes it into the software and is supported by the core team, but wasn't done by someone who is working in open source full time. Happens all the time.
I could also imagine it has maybe something to do with motivation. So a lot of people contribute to open source because, I don't know, they have a personal problem they want to solve, or because they have they just enjoy doing it. And and then as soon as you add money into the mix, for some people it becomes a job, and maybe they already have one. Maybe it makes them feel more committed then, and something that they cannot actually commit to right now. And so I could imagine that this maybe is also a factor. I've seen it a bunch of times with Octoprint where I offered someone commit access, and they were like, no, that makes it way too official. I don't want that yet. Way too much responsibility, way too much implication, way too much commitment, basically. So I could maybe imagine that this is the case here as well.
Right, that's all true, and I'm not making it up. People have said no to me as well. I don't want to be paid for my contributions.
Yeah. Again, going back to, we're all people and we all have different thoughts and feelings and motivations. So I think that makes sense. Okay, before we go to our next data point, we have a new guest. So I'd like to give John an opportunity to introduce himself, and then we'll go on to the next question. John, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Me? Oh man. All right. Hi, my name is John Leader. I'm the original creator and author of Vuetify, which is a UI library for Vue.js framework. I've been doing it since 2016, and I've been open source since early 2015. And yeah, thank you for having me here today. Sorry I'm late. Daughter's recital.
It's okay. I think we all understand. The world is a different place now. Okay, so the next data point is kind of interesting. I think it kind of builds on what we were saying, like what are motivations? Why do people enjoy being maintainers? So we asked folks, what do you enjoy about being a maintainer? And what we found was maintainers most enjoy making an impact on the world and doing creative, challenging work. So, you know, making an impact, really pushing themselves to solve a difficult problem. And then we also found that at least at a high level, the thing that folks were least like to say that they enjoy is getting paid, which makes sense, but many of them aren't getting paid much. So, you know, digging in, is it that they don't enjoy getting paid or that they're not getting paid and therefore it's not something that they can offer as something they like about open source? And then in the second chart, when you look at the differences to how many people say they enjoy getting paid by how much they get paid, the contrast between those people who make more than 10K a year for their maintenance work, and of course, they enjoy getting paid a lot more than the people who make less than 1K per year because it's not a factor for them. So, you know, hearing that and hearing those data points and taking a look at those charts, what do you think is the primary reason that why do you enjoy working in open source? Why do you enjoy being a maintainer? The maintainers that you work with, what are you hearing from them? What brings them joy being a maintainer?
Well, Pillow is on Mars, so I'm told, so that makes me very happy. I'll just say that you know, everyone is different, and for me, the just doing it because I would do it anyway thing is the best part. So, you know, I have many open source projects, and it just so happens that Pillow was successful. There's other ones that aren't, and no one cares about, but it's the same thrill. But additionally, the way the scenario or the way Pillow ended up working is very satisfying with a few folks, two guys that do most of the Pillow work, and two developers and two senior level, me and one other person, who I make sure Pillow keeps happening, and he does the security stuff. So just I wrote a blog entry once that Pillow runs itself. So the way that it just sort of evolved into this functional thing that is being pushed out every quarter is just, you know, thrilling to me.
I mean, from the general Python standpoint, I mean, I'm not a maintainer myself, but obviously interact with maintainers every day in my day job. But I think the personal and community impact of it is very important to a lot of people. And I think that the mission behind a community also has a lot of that value. I mean, you know, is diversity important for that community that you're contributing to? You know, what other kind of values does it bring? And I think that helps people get involved with the community and also stay with the community. As I'm sure Brenna will talk in a later data point, the downsides of it, you know, there needs to be a good balance between the two. So I feel like all of the data points that we see here with the positivity and the impact, that is the good balance that brings everyone here. And one of the most popular sayings in the Python community is, I came for the language and I stayed for the community. And I think that says a lot about why people are where they are.
I think you're right. That's a really good point. Other folks that have thoughts? Isabel?
Yes, I hope you can't hear the noise, but yes, I agree with many of the points that were in the data points. I personally I'm not maintaining a project that is right now being used by a lot of users. So my focus when I contribute to open source is mostly in the community. For example, sometimes I'm part of a couple of communities and I keep hearing the same thing from friends or people from the community that they don't know where to start, how to contribute to open source, where to start and how to start, where to contribute to. So I see mostly what I do in open source as I do a little bit of advocate work when I talk about open source, and whether it's in a conference meetup or in these small groups, because if someone tells me, for example, I create in one of the Slack communities I'm in, I created a Slack channel saying open source, and it's like an open forum for, hey, what are your thoughts about open source? Why you don't contribute? You want to contribute to JavaScript? Here's how you can find projects. So I would say that's what I enjoy about contributing in the way that I contribute, because I can help a lot of people that are not contributing because they just feel very intimidated. They feel there's a lot of a big high bar to contribute to open source. And I also agree with the other points. Like I learned a lot from the people in the community. I have juniors and I have seniors there, and I learn from both. So again, it's about the community, and I believe about bringing more people to contribute to open source and feel less intimidated. I believe that's positive impact in the world. And it also allows me to fulfill the creative, challenging part, because I work mainly as a software engineer, and sometimes in this little world that I have on the side, I can branch out. And for example, mostly what I do is reviewing PRs or talking with people in open sessions. So yeah, I resonated with a lot of what was there. And I'm not paid for open source, so I cannot talk about that side of things, but all the other things make it worth it. That's what I have to say.
That's excellent. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think it's important to recognize the fact that there are a lot of different reasons that folks show up, and not all of them are money. So does anyone else have any thoughts that they'd like to share, or any questions further on this data point?
I think it's interesting. I'll just throw in, oh, sorry about the dog. Python community is awesome. So I did stay for the community as well.
Yeah, I just have one little data point.
Of
more.
course.
Yeah, again, the community part. Not just about the technical side, but also I get to know so many different perspectives from people from different parts of the world that I wouldn't get if I weren't in this community. I know people from India and from Australia and from America, and it just grew, not just professionally, but also personally. So yeah, the community is super important.
I can only repeat that. That I've gotten so many new friends through my open source work, some of which I consider some of my best friends all across the globe. So people I would never have met otherwise, and I would never have interacted with otherwise. And that has been so much, so valuable basically. And that adds also to the whole I enjoy learning part, because I do enjoy learning part, and I do not only enjoy learning the coding part, but also the interacting with people part, and the branding part, and the community building part, and all of that. So all of these things that you need to do when you're a maintainer, and all of these things that you get to enjoy when you're a maintainer, those are simply amazing and pretty unique to open source, I would say, because I come from a normal IT consulting background, and that was a completely different kind of environment to work in than what I'm now in daily. So pretty amazing, actually.
Brenna, can I transition to the next a slide about the dislikes? This has to do with community.
Yeah.
And this also has to do with something that's not in the report or the slides. And that's about people disliked being a maintainer because it's also lonely. I believe 36%. Here we go. No, sorry. 36% said one of the things they dislike about being a maintainer is that it can be lonely. So people say they enjoy being a maintainer because of the community. They also dislike it because it can be lonely. That's a paradox. And what was really interesting when we dug into the numbers is that the maintainers in Europe were much more likely to be lonely than the maintainers in North America. The maintainers in North America were more likely to say they enjoyed the community aspects than the people in Europe. And that was something that maybe I don't know if it was because of the sample or something deeper, but that's something that's maybe to look at in the future. And basically, the way I gathered it was that the people in North America seem to have combined their work and their personal life together, and that actually created more stress in terms of the maintainer life because they couldn't create boundaries at all between what they were doing. But it also had meant that their open source maintainer communities were also combined. So their open source communities were also their social communities. That's the data that was not in the data. That's my analysis.
It can be stressful and toxic, and you have to learn how to deal with it, just like in real life, so to speak. And Pillow is not stressful, or at least it's the least stressful project I've ever worked on. But I've worked on other open source projects where, when I was, 20 years ago, didn't have the experience to know, didn't know what was healthy and not healthy. And so there's a learning curve to projects, and you can get hurt and into situations that aren't healthy. So you have to learn those lessons and then apply them.
I think I have 2 points to make. One, I would love to ask, maybe Lawrence knows the answer, and I'm sorry I didn't see this sooner, but when was the data collected for the survey? Because I also think that, for example, from my point of view, we run PyCon US, which has a lot of in-person interaction with a lot of maintainers. And yes, the majority do come from the Americas regions, but we do increasingly have people coming from all over the world. And of course, there are PyCons happening all over the world, especially in Europe. So I'm just wondering, is this maybe a side effect of the pandemic, of people not being able to kind of get together and work together and meet new people, that kind of carries into the asynchronous contributions and maintenance that happens with projects?
It was in February and March, and I do not think it had anything to do with the pandemic. And that's in my intuition, but I had actually I've looked at in detail impact of the pandemic on open source contributions, and there's people another company called Bitergia that I've looked at open source contribution analysis, and I don't think that's had a big impact on this specifically.
That's good to know.
Maybe to shed some light on this, because I'm a European and I would have said it can get lonely on this survey, even though I also just praised the community situation. And the thing is, from my personal perspective, so for me, it took quite a while to get to a point where I didn't feel lonely anymore. So in the beginning, when I started doing this, working from home 100% and not having colleagues like I used to do all my life until then, that was a very hard cut in my life. And just being able to go into the kitchenette or to the water cooler or something, and then hitting up a colleague and just brainstorming some problem with them, that's all of this possibility just suddenly went out of the window. And opening an issue for something like this all the time doesn't necessarily work. And IRC, Discord, Slack, all these chat platforms, they come close, but only close. So yeah, I think maybe that is a bit of this shift that a lot of us experience. And I can also confirm that, well, at least Germans usually don't mix work with private life that much. So that might also be a factor here. Most of my friends, I cannot hit up most of my friends and talk to them about like this bug that I just had or something like that to just get this brainstorming out there. They can still play rubber duck, but they cannot really give me any meaningful input. Most of them, at least. Some of them can, but and maybe that is a factor here. I don't know. The pandemic probably made this worse for some, because they suddenly found themselves completely alone in their office all day, because up until then they still had a day job where they went out to meet other people, and now they didn't. And so I could imagine maybe that factors in there as well. But in general, I think open source maintenance usually is a quiet, lonely affair. Not necessarily that you do not interact with people, but more that the immediate socializing just isn't there. So at least that would be my interpretation of that, coming from someone who, yeah, fits the pattern, so to speak.
Careful what you wish for, because it starts out quiet and it gets real loud after a while. But there's a silver lining. When it's quiet, you get lots of work done. When it's loud, you can start to try to control the chaos. But my situation is a little weird because Beautify is just so large that it's very difficult to try to wrap everything around there. So it's not lonely anymore, but I wish it was sometimes, because it's very difficult to get any work done.
Yeah, but careful. What I meant with loneliness or with a lack of interaction wasn't necessarily that you do not get, I mean, I also get swamped in tickets. I get people that want something from me on the Discord. I get people who directly ping me on the forums and all that, but all of these things are situations where someone isn't interested in interacting with me socially, but rather because they want something from me. And this is not what I would classify as something fight in my loneliness. In fact, that would actually make it worse, because that then shows me I have all these things that I need to do, and that makes this feeling of maybe not loneliness, but rather solitude even worse. So I'm not sure if, I don't think this is necessarily a problem with small projects where there's large projects, but more like a problem of the kind of interaction that is lacking or missing in the picture.
Well, I guess what I meant by that is, so when the Beautify community first started, we were on Jitter or Gitter, whatever it's called. We eventually moved to Discord, but there wasn't very many people there. So when I think of terms of lonely, I guess I spend most of my life in a 10 by 10 room anyway. So the interaction that I get with people when talking about code has become less of a, they're wanting something from me, and more of that they are engaging with me. So early on, when the community was smaller, it was very easy to kind of dive in there, talk with people, meet individuals. And funnily enough, more than half of our core team was found within the first year of Beautify existing. And they've been the same people that have been there the entire time. But as the framework has grown, getting in the community is, you could waste many days in there. So being able to, it's like it changes over time. For me personally, it's less about people wanting something from me and just more about, kind of being a servant, being kind of like a public servant for others. Because at least for me personally, if you're into open source, it's about giving. So you're expected for people to take as much as you'll give, and it's up to you to determine what that is. And as things get bigger, at least for me, there's just so much noise that sometimes I miss being able to get down on a smaller level where I can interact with people on a more personal level. So anyways, that's kind of what I was more talking to, is, or at least for me over time, because Beautify had a small community and now we have a very, very large community. And I find myself having to mute more and more channels because over time, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but it can become a distraction. And my role has shifted a little bit over time. So yeah, it's just one of those things where I definitely harken back to the times where I actually got to spend time in the community and meet more developers, which is why conferences are very important, in-person ones especially, to actually meet with people
I think that's all another reason that the business model is so important, and companies like Tidelift, where it's not just you and they come in and take, I mean, Tidelift made my job, 1,000 times easier. Not that it was too terrible or stressful before, but being like some entity that is there to take care of you and deal with some of this other stuff, like you would, any job where if you don't like this job, you quit and go do another job. And so it becomes, I just feel very strongly that the one answer to that problem is this business model where companies are, taking on some of the burden and helping these, projects along.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to add to that, and I know we've been on this topic for a little bit, but when I read these data stats, I originally thought back to, I don't know how many people have read Nadia Egbal's book about working in open source, but it really talks about how maintaining software nowadays is very individually centric, right? And how the communities behind these maintainers is super important to provide that kind of business structure, as well as the companies that provide services like Tidelift, and even the companies that use the software that these maintainers are maintaining. So I think that that's kind of where we're at, and we really need more support like that popping up to be able to sustain this individual approach of all these maintainers, especially now being so distributed.
That's a really good point. Thank you. Okay, we're ready for our last data point. And we have talked a little bit about this so far in this conversation. And it's really focusing on diversity in open source and just every type of diversity. Like, is open source just, is it diverse enough? And 3/4 of our respondents, 75% of the people we polled, said no, that open source should be more diverse. There should be easier ways for folks to get started in open source, to understand what that process looks like, better support, better community. I'm not a maintainer, so it's hard for me to have an opinion on this. What do y'all think? How do you think, through your eyes, how do you see the world of open source? Is it looking diverse to you? Not diverse? Are there any ways that you've thought of that we could improve that? Gina?
Yeah, I have some. I mean, I'm a female open source maintainer, and according to the majority of people using open source out there, I do not exist. So that is one thing that, I mean, this is only one part, of course, one facet of diversity. We have way bigger, way more issues there to deal with. But even just looking at this female-male ratio that we see in open source, and the general approach of people who use an open source, a piece of open source software, or otherwise interact with an open source community, that the maintainer must be male, because it cannot possibly be a woman, and the number of times that I've been misgendered in the process is really quite telling. I think that we definitely still do have a problem there. So yeah.
I think it's broken like the real world is broken, and I feel cheated because in kindergarten, through 8th grade, I was taught racism was a thing of the past, and I just turned 50 and it's not a thing of the past. So open source software has all those same problems that the real world has, and how to solve them is hard work. So it falls under, to me, more hard work for the project. I like that codes of conduct have made the rounds as a kid of as an internet kid of the 90s, where netiquette was the thing, and learning how to get along with people online. Seeing that enforced or codified has been helpful, I think.
Yeah, I think I'll definitely underline the enforced portion of it. I think they're just having a code of conduct nowadays doesn't really necessarily help the cause, right? It's just some page on a website that most people forget it's there. But I really appreciate that a lot of communities and a lot of projects are enforcing code of conducts now, which is going to get us a long way. I feel like there is small change happening, but it's not happening fast enough. And I think the only thing that's really going to solve it is more funding to provide structure to kind of help that move along faster. Individuals can only do so much. Mentoring someone as a volunteer can easily become overwhelming, and having people that get paid to kind of help move this along is going to get us where we need to be eventually.
I agree. That's a very good point. Does anyone else have any thoughts about this, or have you seen anything in the community where what folks are doing to try and fix this issue or work on this issue? Anything you'd like to share?
What I think is what might maybe help it, at least this is my approach to my particular problem with the diversity situation, is simply trying to be more visible. But of course, this means putting yourself out, making yourself open to attack and all of that. So that is a bit of a two-sided sword, so to speak. But as long as we still have the situation where if you go watch a talk on YouTube and it's a white male, and you watch a talk in the theater somewhere, it's a white male, then people will just assume, okay, I'm a female, I cannot do that. I am not white, I cannot do that. So that is stuff that I think can be fought easily, in air quotes, by making the people who do not fit the mold more visible. But yeah, for me personally, being an introvert who never wanted to be much in the spotlight, this is still something that I struggle with severely, but I'm trying my best.
I mean, it's kind of hard to comment as a white cis male, with everyone directing at that. But from me personally, as someone who has spent a lot of time focusing on building a diverse team of different nationalities and genders, the one thing that I've seen throughout is it's more so to do with often people, when they begin to get into open source to help other, help maintainers, they get filled with this kind of enthusiasm to contribute to something that's bigger than themselves, until something happens, because open source is like sponsorship, right? It's the first thing to go whenever you don't have enough time. So, to me personally, I found more difficulty in finding niches to put people in to grow professionally, which is why our team is so small, because most people, if you are unable to put them into something where they feel they can grow, maybe something different from their job, then they're less invested in it. And then, in addition to that, just like you said, sorry, I don't remember, can't see your name on here. Hold on. Gina, am I saying that right? So, one of the things that I've worked with, women, I've worked with men, and it's always the same thing, is finding the role that fits into people's life. It's like finding anything else. And, we add an application to our life, we do, we add a new stop on our way to work, whatever the case is, we have this pattern in life, and you have to find a way to be able to work with their pattern and find something that works with it, so that, not only are they invested in it, and they have some ownership to it, but it just feels more natural. It's like having a job where you're not worried about getting fired, and it gives you the ability to, grow professionally. And anyway, so the point I'm trying to get to is, the biggest part is always for me, because I've had tons of people to try to get them on the team, is finding something that not only they like, but is not only a continual like, but something that they will take with them in the long run. And then people also wax and wane over time. People, some people comes into a season, they're really busy, and that's why it's up to you to have kind of a device group of individuals, so that you have people kind of filling in over the years. So that's, for me personally, it's always been difficulty is moving people into positions, because I've worked with I don't know what they're called now, but they were called view vixens before, and we have Johanna, which is who's our social media person, and and we had other females that came on the team, and it was really difficult to find a role, and they wanted to, they said, hey, I'm not able to contribute the way that I want to, and I want to do something else, and that's perfectly fine. So it's the same thing that happens with men and women, at least in my perspective as a white male. It's just that there are more men in the field. So the same error rate that applies means there's just less potential. So, I mean, we're always trying to, I fight for it all the time. I think that there's a lot of value from all sexes and genders. So
It's
What
culture.
do we
Oh, go
actually
ahead,
mean by?
Lawrence.
Okay, Jeff, go on. Sorry.
it's cultural too. And so if diversity is fixed in whatever your, you know, culture is in the US, I don't think diversity is fixed. And, you know, so we do the best we can in our, you know, little parts of the world to fix it, and hope that everyone else is fixing it elsewhere and that eventually it all comes together.
Isabel, did you have a point that you wanted to make? I thought please.
Yes. I have a lot of thoughts about this whole thing, but I kind of agree that, you know, whatever exists already in the tech industry naturally proceeds to the open source world. What I can talk about is, I really like what Gina said about, I think representation matters so much, you know, everywhere on media, on open source and tech. You know, I think a lot about representation, like in movies and TV shows. And yeah, like I'm naturally part of some women in tech communities, or also Black developers community. And what I think I can do is be a little bit more visible, talk about open source, be a part of these little communities which are targeted, and be able to talk and say, hey, open source is not that intimidating and you can be a part of that too. And then there's also like, you know, not just saying that, hey, you can contribute with code, and try to get not just diverse, you know, developers, but get diverse everything. And that's one of the things that I really shout out every time I talk about open source is you can contribute as a designer, project manager, tester, yada, yada. So yeah, I think representation helps a lot mitigate the problem that already exists. And that's what I personally try to do to help. And just another data point, the community I mean, the bigger corporation, NATB.org, is all about helping women in technology. However, this doesn't mean that we only have women in the community. I would say that the people that are helping me managing a couple of projects, I would say it's in terms of gender, half male, half female. So yeah, I think creating beginner-friendly communities, propagating the word, letting more diverse people lead, right? Because, you know, if I can see what I can one day become, I don't know, a lot of real power. Yeah, those are my 2 cents on it.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your experiences with the Google Summer of Code? Because it seems like from our study, 56% of the people thought that mentorship opportunities were a good way to increase contributor diversity.
Yeah. What I just said is my version of mentoring. For example, when a couple of Slack communities where I talk specifically about open source and I say, hey, what do you need to know about that? Do you want to jump into a call? And I can tell you, you know, it's not as scary as you think. And I see that as mentoring. And then there's people who already see me talking about open source and they ask me directly in channels about open source. So again, that's also mentoring, right?
And should there be specific programs, or should it be is just informal mentoring just as good?
I think programs really helps. Like I got into Google Summer of Code, and the admin, one of my biggest mentors and inspirations in open source, you know, she helped me continue in the community, continue in open source and understanding what this can be about. So programs definitely help. I know that there's a community, She Code Africa, and they have now started like a mentoring program. And I think that will totally help, you know, people having close relationship with people in open source, and that can, you know, help you get the first step and the second step. So yeah, mentorship programs makes total sense.
Yep. All right. Thank you so much. Somehow we have talked for an hour. And this was a really awesome conversation. I am so grateful to everyone for joining me today and, you know, being patient through my nerves and being easy on me. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I don't have anything else to add. Does anyone have anything they'd like to say before we wrap it up?
Thank you for having me. Great panel discussion. Great to see you all.
Yeah, this was a really awesome discussion. Thank you so much to everyone. And I'm really excited for us to share this with the world next Monday.